Welcome to the deep dive. We're going deep today with one of the big names in military strategy, Carl von Clausewitz.
Yeah, Clausewitz, he's a giant in the field for good reason, really.
We're digging into excerpts from On War, his big one, specifically Book 3, chapters 16, 17, and 18.
Now, if you've tried reading Clausewitz, you know it can be, well, dense. But stick with us. What we want to unpack is how his ideas on the rhythm of war, they still matter on today's battlefields, just like back in the 19th century.
And we know you, our listener, are serving in the military, so this isn't just theoretical, right? We're making this relevant to you. Now, Clausewitz, he talks about this push and pull in war between action and then inaction. He even calls it the suspension of action. I mean, doesn't that seem weird? Like, shouldn't both sides be constantly trying to, well, win?
It's a great point. You'd think it'd be all out all the time, right? But history shows us different. Clausewitz points out all these examples of armies just, well, waiting. And it's not always about being scared or indecisive. He's saying sometimes there's a reason to hit pause, holding back, observing, that can be smarter than just charging in.
So it's like picking your moments instead of just going in with, like, blinders on.
Exactly. And he breaks down why this happens in three main ways. First up, human nature. Just being human, we don't like unnecessary risk. Takes a really strong leader or sometimes crazy pressure to overcome that.
Oh, totally. Even when you know what you're supposed to do, there's that voice like, yeah, but what if?
And that doesn't go away even with all the tech in modern warfare. Sending people into danger, it's huge. That human weight, it's always there in the decisions.
So the more serious things get, the more important those pauses probably are.
100%. And that leads right into Clausewitz's second point. Fog of war. Classic, right? He's saying, no matter how good your intel is, you're never going to see the whole picture. War's just too messy.
That's wild. I mean, you'd think with satellites and all that, we'd have it figured out by now.
Right. But even with tech, figuring out what information really matters, that's harder than ever.
Cutting through the noise, I bet that's way harder on a modern battlefield than it ever was.
Absolutely. Now, the third thing Clausewitz brings up, it's the power of defense. He's basically saying holding ground is just easier than trying to take it.
So even if you're on the attack, you got to be ready to defend, like, all the time.
You get it. We see this play out constantly even today. Think of any conflict where the defenders, even if their tech isn't as good, they know the turf, they inflict these huge losses just by using the terrain.
Right, that levels the playing field, even against a stronger enemy.
Totally. And here's where it gets really interesting. Clausewitz is writing this in the 1800s. Right when warfare is going through a total revolution, the Napoleonic Wars are raging.
Oh, right. Everything's changing. So, like, how does this stuff apply when we've got cyber warfare and drones and all that?
That is the million-dollar question. How do you take this old school wisdom and use it in the 21st century? And that, my friend, is what we're going to dig into next.
You mentioned Clausewitz writing on war right in the middle of all this change with the Napoleonic Wars. What was it about that time, that era, that was shaking things up so much in warfare?
Well, you got to picture it. Clausewitz is watching Napoleon just tear up the rule book, right? Before him, war was almost like polite, professional armies, clear battle lines. It was all about outsmarting the other guy, but on a smaller scale.
Yeah, you think of those old paintings, everyone lined up in formation, big open fields.
Exactly. But Napoleon comes along and he's like, nope, we're throwing everything into this. Civilians, new weapons, factories churning out supplies, total war.
So it becomes everybody's fight, not just the soldiers anymore.
And that's huge. That idea still echoes today, right? Clausewitz saw that firsthand, how this messed with everything. And it's because of that human element that we keep talking about.
Right, because now you've got regular folks caught in the crossfire, resisting, fighting for their homes.
And that's where what he says about nations defending themselves, it gets really interesting. Clausewitz talks about this tension that builds up before a big attack. Thinking of our listener, folks in the military. Do you get that? Is that something?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, not in the same way, but that feeling before a deployment or even a big presentation, that knowing what's at stake, it's huge.
He nails it, right?
Yeah.
Clausewitz says in those moments, everything's amplified. A tiny mistake, one hesitation, it can blow up into something massive, change the entire war even.
Like, you got to be, like, ice cold under pressure, but also knowing when to make that move.
Yes. But also that restraint, that's hard. Remember, he talks about those pauses. They're not just a break, they're strategic.
It's not about just doing something. It's about doing the right something. Knowing when to hold back. That's got to be just as tough as attacking.
And these days, with how fast everything moves, news, intel, that's harder than ever for military leaders.
Because the pace of everything is just insane. You don't have time to sit around planning for weeks like they used to.
And that's why this rhythm of war idea, this back and forth, it's so key. You got to be fast when it matters, but knowing when to be fast, that's what separates.
So much to think about. We've covered a lot of ground here. But for our listener, someone out there in the thick of it, what are the big takeaways from Clausewitz? How does this actually work in modern warfare?
$1 million question, right? And I think even with all the tech we've got now, drones, cyber, Clausewitz would say, don't forget about the people. That's still key.
It does seem like that's his big thing. Always comes back to the human element.
It's because wars aren't fought by computers, right? It's people making decisions, feeling fear, messing up. Clausewitz knew that side of it better than most.
So as a leader, you got to factor that in, not just for your own troops, but the enemy too.
100%. Knowing why they're fighting, what they're afraid of, that's just as useful as knowing their positions, almost.
It's like two battles happening at once, the real one and one in everyone's heads.
You got it. And to win the whole thing, you got to be fighting on both those levels, exploiting their weaknesses, keeping your own team strong.
Winning hearts and minds, as they say, not just territory.
Exactly. And that goes right into another thing Clausewitz is big on, being able to adapt. He knew no two wars are the same. You got to be ready to shift gears.
So having a plan is good, but being able to change it on the fly is essential.
And that means really getting the principles of warfare, seeing the whole chessboard, even when things are crazy up close.
Makes sense. So Clausewitz gives you the tools to do that, even when it's chaos all around.
Yeah, he gives you a framework to make sense of it all. That's why he's still the guy, even now.
It's about the rhythm of it, the action and the pauses, the people involved.
Yeah.
And never forgetting that mental side of things. That's huge.
You nailed it. Those are the Clausewitz classics, and they haven't expired no matter what tech comes along.
Well, we've definitely given everyone a lot to chew on today. For our listeners, keep Clausewitz in mind, keep studying, keep asking the hard questions. It matters.
Could have said it better myself. The best weapon you've got is up here, Tap's head. Never stop learning.